Inside was a small handwritten note in neat sloping letters. "Don't panic about the rent. Take your time. You don't have to carry this alone." It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, kind, but something about the way he'd written, "You don't have to carry this alone," made her chest tighten. She set the note on the fridge with a magnet. Each time she passed it that day, her eyes lingered a little longer than she meant them to. The days that followed blurred into a pattern of small, unexpected gestures. A link to a job listing forwarded to her email. A grocery bag left at her door with a scribbled, "Bought too much. Please help me feel less ridiculous." A mockingly fancy coffee. Lena had never missed a rent payment in her life. She was the kind of tenant building managers barely remembered, except in the best way. Quiet, tidy, polite, always on time. Her windowsill plants were lined up like well-behaved children. Her sink was never stacked with dishes, and invoices were paid before they even had time to warm up in her inbox. Until the month everything fell apart. The email arrived on a rainy Wednesday. The kind where the clouds sat low over the city and the air smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. It was from the human resources account at the agency where she'd worked for 6 years as a digital strategist. No greeting with her name. No warning, just a sterile subject line. Organizational restructuring notice. She opened it at her small dining table, still in pajama pants, a half-eaten piece of toast going cold beside her laptop. By the third line, her vision blurred. Her position had been made redundant. Effective immediately. Severance information would be attached. They appreciated her contributions. They wished her every success in her future endeavors. Lena stared at the screen, numb. The rain ticked against the window like fingers trying to get her attention. Her coffee went cold. A faint buzz hummed in her ears, the kind that arrives when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes already know. She read the email again and again. By the time the shock loosened its grip, the toast was hard and she had memorized every sentence that told her she was no longer needed. Days slid into each other after that. She woke up late, opened her laptop, stared at job boards until the words blurred. Cover letters started and died in blank documents. Her bank app became a source of dread, tapped open and closed in the same motion. Little red numbers, pending payments, friendly automated warnings. Letters began to stack on the edge of her kitchen counter. Utility bills, credit card statements, a reminder about her student loan, and then inevitably the rent notice. It arrived printed on plain white paper slid under her door, in the same quiet way it always had. Only this time, the sight of it made her stomach twist. She picked it up with shaking fingers and read the amount she had paid every month without thinking. It was the same amount, but for the first time, it felt like a wall she couldn't climb. Lena sat at the table with the notice in front of her, the afternoon light slanting across the words. She did the math 3 different ways in a notebook as if the numbers might change if she looked at them from a different angle. They didn't. She didn't have it. The man who owned the building lived on the ground floor in one of the corner units that faced the small courtyard. His name was Marcus Hale. Early 40s, maybe tall with dark hair that had started to gray at the temples. He was the kind of person who seemed to move at half the speed of everyone else, but in a way that made you feel he had decided that was the right pace, and the rest of the world was wrong. When the pipes rattled, he showed up with tools and a soft apology. When a light in the hallway flickered, it was fixed by morning. He spoke in a low, even tone, and Lena had only ever known him through brief, polite encounters by the mailboxes or on the staircase. She knew almost nothing about him except for 2 things. He wore a watch with a worn leather band, and somehow his presence always made the building feel a little less lonely. That quiet steadiness was why 4 days after the rent notice arrived, she found herself standing outside his door, rehearsing sentences in her head. She knocked, then nearly bolted back up the stairs. The door opened before she could commit to retreat. Marcus stood there in a plain navy t-shirt, flecks of paint on one sleeve as if he had been patching something. He frowned, not with irritation, but with concern. "Lena," he said gently, like a question. "Everything okay?" The words she'd practiced dissolved in an instant. Her throat tightened and her eyes burned hot and sudden. She hated it, crying in front of someone she barely knew. She managed a thin, shaky smile instead. I might be late with rent this month," she blurted out too fast, too blunt. "I lost my job, and I'm trying to sort things out," but it's been. Her voice cracked. She looked away, mortified. Marcus didn't roll his eyes. He didn't sigh. He didn't ask why she hadn't planned better or mention policies or late fees. He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said quietly. "You don't have to explain everything in the hallway." She hesitated, fingers clamped around the paper in her hand, then stepped inside. His place surprised her. It was simple, but not empty. Bookshelves lining one wall. A camera bag on the armchair. Half-finished mugs on the coffee table. It felt lived in but gentle, like a space someone actually used, not just existed in. He gestured toward the couch. Sit, want some tea? Coffee. Tea's fine, she murmured, still clutching the rent notice like evidence in a trial. He disappeared into the small kitchen area, the clink of a kettle echoing softly. Lena sat on the edge of the couch, unable to stop the words once they started. It was an email. No meeting, no warning, just due to restructuring. Your position has been eliminated. That's how they phrased it. Eliminated. Like my job got erased by accident. A faint smile tugged at Marcus's mouth as he filled a mug. They always find such dramatic words for firing people, he said. I'm sorry. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping. A small part of her had expected him to be brisk and transactional, referencing dates and agreements. Instead, he just listened. By the time he brought the tea and sat across from her, she'd told him more than she'd meant to about the late-night panic. The browser tabs full of listings, the way shame pressed on her chest, like wait, I've never been late, she finished softly. Not once, but this time, I can't make it. Not on time. Anyway, I thought you should know before the first. Marcus took a sip of his own drink, studying her for a moment. His eyes were steady, not invasive. You've lived here 3 years, he said slowly. You've never caused a problem. You've done everything right. Life got rough. Not you. He set his mug down. Don't worry about this month's rent. We'll figure it out later. Lena stared at him, blinking. I just told you I can't pay. I heard you. He said. You're not the kind of person who vanishes in the night and leaves me with an empty unit. Take some time. Focus on finding your feet again. The relief that flooded her was so sharp it almost hurt. Her eyes stung, and she pressed a hand over her mouth. I don't want special treatment, she whispered. This isn't special treatment, he replied quietly. It's just human kindness. Sit with me a bit. You look like you haven't breathed in days. They ended up on the small balcony outside his living room, city lights flickering beyond the courtyard. The sky was clearing, a faint strip of blue, stubbornly clinging to the horizon. They talked about nothing important at first. Weather, the creaky elevator, how the laundromat down the block had a vending machine that never took cards. Then Marcus asked what she had actually loved about her job. Not the tasks, but the part that felt like hers. Lena found herself talking about campaigns she'd built from scratch. The thrill of seeing a client's tiny brand suddenly get noticed. The way ideas lit up a room when the team clicked. You'll find something else, he said after a while. Someone with your brain doesn't stay on the bench for long. She laughed softly, surprised by the warmth in her chest. Compliments about her work had always felt transactional before, tied to performance reviews and growth plans. This one felt genuine. When she finally went back upstairs, the rent notice remained folded in her pocket. The problem wasn't magically solved, but the weight on her chest had shifted just a little. She stood at her window that night, looking down at his balcony. The faint glow from his apartment spilling into the courtyard. When he'd said her name earlier, it had sounded different than usual. Gentle, like he was setting it down carefully. She slept for the first time in days. In the morning, a thin envelope was tucked under her door. Lena picked it up with a flutter in her stomach she didn't want to examine too closely. Cup from the cafe on the corner, complete with her name spelled correctly on the lid. Waiting outside her apartment on a morning when she'd barely had the energy to stand. Every time it happened, she told herself the same thing. He's being nice, that's all. This is just what a decent landlord does when a tenant hits a rough patch. But decent landlords didn't usually notice when your shoulders were sagging a little more than yesterday. One evening, after another fruitless stretch of job hunting, someone knocked on her door. The hour was too late for mail and too early for delivery. She opened it to find Marcus standing there with a brown paper bag cradled in one arm. Intervention, he said lightly. You can't survive on cereal and instant noodles forever. I saw the recycling bin. It's incriminating. She rolled her eyes, but a laugh escaped. You've been monitoring my trash. Just trying to protect the integrity of this building, he said, amused. Mind if I come in? I promise I know how to cook at least 3 things that won't kill us. Her instinct told her to say no, to keep a clear line between them. He was her landlord. She was his tenant. She was also married, regardless of what her empty apartment suggested. The ring on her finger still glinted in the kitchen light, even if it sometimes felt disconnected from the life she was actually living. But loneliness does strange things to boundaries. It rubs at them, softens their edges. Sure, she said quietly. Come in. They chopped vegetables in her cramped kitchen, bumping elbows and laughing when an onion rolled dramatically off the counter. Marcus teased her for holding the knife like it was a fragile artifact instead of a tool. She mocked him for his serious face when he stirred sauce, brow furrowed like he was negotiating a treaty. It felt harmless until their hands brushed when they both reached for the same spoon. It was nothing. A passing contact, skin on skin for a breathlong second. And yet, it wasn't nothing. Lena felt a spark, sharp and unexpected, shooting up her arm. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then, Marcus cleared his throat, stepping back slightly. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's fine," she said too quickly, her voice thinner than she wanted it to be. They finished cooking, ate, talked, laughed. When he left, standing in her doorway with his hands in his pockets, he looked at her for a moment, like he was searching for the right words. "You don't have to go through this whole mess alone," he said softly. She swallowed. "I know," but later, leaning against the closed door with her heart pounding in her chest, she also knew that was only part of the problem now, because it wasn't just comfort she was starting to crave when she heard his footsteps in the hall. It was him. She woke early the next morning and found another envelope under her door. No rent notice this time. No job rejection. Inside was a small brass key attached to a worn leather key. "If you ever need to talk or just not be by yourself, my place is open. You don't even have to knock." Lena held the key in her palm, the metal warm from her skin. Her stomach flipped, and not entirely with gratitude. A line had been drawn. Nothing explicit, nothing she could point to and say, "There, that's inappropriate." But she felt it just the same. She left the key on the counter for 2 days, moving it around absent-mindedly as she wiped crumbs or put down her mug. She picked it up, put it back, tried and failed to ignore it. The third morning, there was a gentle knock on her door. Marcus stood outside holding 2 travel cups of coffee and a lopsided smile. "Thought you might want backup," he said. "Mondays are hostile." "It's Thursday," she replied, managing a grin. "Exactly," he said, hostile. They ended up sitting on the front steps of the building, the city still yawning into wakefulness around them. The air smelled like wet pavement and roasted beans from the cafe down the street. Cars rolled by. A dog dragged its sleepy owner along the sidewalk. Marcus talked about nights spent taking photos of empty streets, about how he used to do freelance work, shooting small events and portraits before he took over the building from his uncle. Lena told him about her childhood in a smaller town, about leaving because she'd wanted more noise, more possibility. It was during one of those mornings that he told her something she hadn't expected. "My wife died 6 years ago," he said almost casually, like a fact he'd repeated often enough that it had lost its sharpness. "Cancer. We never thought. Well, no one ever thinks it's going to be them." Lena turned her face toward him, the warmth of the cup more noticeable suddenly. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He shrugged one shoulder, staring at the street. "Some days it feels like it happened in another life. Some days it feels like last week. Mostly it feels like a chapter I keep revisiting even though I know how it ends." He paused, but eventually you stop expecting the ache to go away. You just learn how to move around it. Something about the way he said it pierced her. Maybe because she also knew what it was to live beside an ache you pretended not to notice. Her husband Adrian had been away for nearly 3 months now. His consulting work sent him to different cities, different time zones, different lives. At first, they tried to keep the connection alive with long calls, shared photos, late-night messages. Over time, the calls shrank. Messages turned into logistics. Flight delayed. Meeting ran late. Can't talk tonight? Exhausted. They still spoke. She still wore the ring. But the conversation had become like a radio station tuned just slightly off. Fuzzy, distant, full of static where music used to be. Marcus noticed everything Adrian didn't have time to see anymore. He noticed when she tied her hair up instead of leaving it down, when the dark circles under her eyes deepened, when she smiled less and laughed only when she was with him. One wet Saturday evening, they sat under the overhang at the back of the building listening to rain tap against the trash bins. The courtyard was empty, puddles glowing faintly under the yellow lights. "You don't deserve to feel invisible," Marcus said suddenly, his voice low. Lena's breath caught. She stared at the slick ground. "I'm not invisible," she said, but it came out more like a wish than a fact. He turned his head to look at her. "Maybe not to everyone," he said, "but sounds like it in the place where it should matter most." She wanted to tell him to stop, to back away from that edge, to remind him and herself that this was dangerous territory, that feelings were starting to grow in soil where they had no business taking root. Instead, she said nothing. Her silence became its own confession. A few days later, Marcus asked if she wanted to come down for dinner. I promise the pasta won't be tragic this time, he joked. And I have a bottle of wine I'm tired of looking at. They're just neighbors having a meal, she told herself as she agreed. His apartment was softer than she remembered it from that first anxious visit. Lamps casting pools of warm light, music playing quietly in the background, the scent of garlic and herbs lingering in the air. They ate at a small table, knees almost touching, telling stories that made them both forget for a while that the rest of their lives existed. The apartment felt like a pocket outside of consequence. After dinner, they washed dishes side by side. The radio murmured in the corner, some old song wrapping the room in familiar comfort. Their elbows brushed. Then their hands did again over the soapy water. This time neither of them pulled away immediately. The pause between them was brief but heavy. A moment stretched thin with the weight of what might happen if they let it. Marcus was the one who broke it. He spoke without looking at her, his voice rougher than before. "You don't have to be afraid of someone caring about you," he said. Lena stilled. The dishcloth in her hands sagged, water dripping slowly back into the sink. Her heart thudded against her ribs painfully loud. "Marcus," she whispered. "I'm married." "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to pretend otherwise. I care more than I meant to." The words hung between them like something fragile and forbidden. Her first instinct was to run to create distance before whatever was flickering between them turned into something that could burn. Instead, she did the one thing that surprised her most. She stayed. She didn't step closer. She didn't step away. She just stood there breathing shallowly, feeling the truth of his words settle over them. "You're kind," she murmured eventually. It wasn't enough. It was too much. It was all she could offer without unraveling. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint traffic outside, the echo of Marcus's voice in her head. She wasn't sure what frightened her more, knowing that he cared about her or realizing that she cared too. The next morning, her phone buzzed while she was making coffee. Adrian's name lit up the screen. She answered with a knot already forming in her stomach. "Hey," he said, his voice thin and distracted. She could hear keyboard taps and voices in the background. "Listen, there's been a change. They want me to stay on the project longer. A few more weeks, maybe a month." Lena stared at the counter. "Right," she said slowly. "Of course. It's just work. Len," he added. "You know how it is. I'll make it up to you. We'll do a trip or something when I'm back." "Sure," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. After they hung up, she stood in her quiet kitchen, the clock ticking far too loudly. Her reflection in the microwave door looked like someone else entirely, someone tired and a little lost. Her gaze slid to the brass key still sitting near the fruit bowl. She picked it up without fully meaning to. It felt heavier than it looked. Before she could talk herself out of it, her feet carried her downstairs. She didn't even use the key. Marcus opened the door as she raised her hand to knock, surprise flickering over his features before softening into something warmer. "I was just about to message you," he said. "You okay?" "I couldn't sleep," Lena admitted. "And then I could, but I didn't want to. And Adrian, he's staying away longer. And she faltered. Her throat felt too tight for the rest. "Come inside," Marcus said gently. They sat on his couch, the lights low. At first, they stuck to safe topics. Jobs she'd applied to, a documentary he'd watched, a funny story about a neighbor who insisted she'd seen a raccoon using the recycling bins. But their words slowly drifted closer to the edge of everything they'd been avoiding. "Do you ever feel like your life belongs more to other people's decisions than to you?" Lena asked quietly, "like you're just reacting, watching." Marcus took a breath, looking at her with a focus that made her want to look away. "All the time," he said. "At least I used to before." He hesitated, then continued before he started showing up at my door. "Looking like the whole world had just dropped onto your shoulders." Lena's chest tightened. "Don't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" he asked, voice softer now, but no less honest. "Because it makes this feel like more than it should be." He looked down at his hands, his jaw flexed once. "Maybe it is more," he said, almost under his breath. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the spell. Adrian's name flashed across the screen again, a cold reminder slicing through the haze. Lena stood up quickly, fingers numb. "I should go," she said. "I shouldn't have come down here at all." Marcus rose slowly. "Lena, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You didn't do anything wrong." She cut in, voice trembling. "I did. I'm dead. I'm forgetting where the lines are." He reached out, then stopped himself halfway, his hand hovering in the space between them. "You haven't done anything unforgivable," he said softly. The words followed her up the stairs, like footsteps. The next morning, there was no coffee waiting, no knock on her door, no note. The absence itself felt like a sound. Lena told herself she should be relieved. This was what she'd said she wanted: space, boundaries, a return to normal. But as the hours passed and the silence stretched, something hollow opened up in her chest. She threw herself into job postings, laundry, cleaning, anything that didn't involve thinking about the floor beneath hers. By evening, she found herself staring at his door from the landing, angry at herself for hoping he might appear, angry at him for listening to her when she told him to stop. She fell asleep, exhausted and restless, the brass key on her nightstand glinting in the dark. A soft scraping sound woke her later, paper sliding against wood. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw the edge of an envelope under her door. Her fingers shook as she opened it. "Lena, we should talk about what this actually is before it becomes something neither of us can live with. I'll be downstairs if you want to." She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, the note resting on her knees, the room dim and still around her. Her heart knew the answer before her mind allowed the thought. If she went down there, nothing between them would be simple again. In the morning, she told herself she would stay away. She made coffee. She opened her laptop. She typed the same sentence into 3 different cover letters, then deleted it each time. She tried to lose herself in tasks that didn't matter. By early afternoon, she caught sight of Marcus through the window, walking down the sidewalk, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, gaze fixed straight ahead. He didn't look up at her window. He didn't linger by the door. Something in her chest buckled. Silence, she realized, could hurt louder than shouting. The next day, Lena stopped waiting for courage to arrive on its own. She walked downstairs and knocked. Marcus opened the door almost immediately. Surprise flitted across his face, followed by something more guarded. "Hey," she said softly. "Can we talk?" He stepped back to let her in. They stood in his living room, neither sitting. The air between them was tense but not hostile, like a room that had been sealed too long and needed a window opened. "I got your note," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're right. We should stop pretending. We don't know what's happening." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to cross a line we can't step back from," he said. "I like you, Lena, more than I should, and you're married. That matters." She stared at the floor for a moment, then lifted her eyes to his. "I do care about you," she admitted. "Too much? Maybe. You made me feel seen again at a time when I thought I'd disappeared. But I made vows. Even if things are messy right now, that has to mean something." He exhaled, shoulders sagging just slightly. "Then maybe this is where we stop," he said. They both knew it wasn't as easy as saying the words. That evening, Lena tried to cook dinner and burned the rice. She sat at the table, chewing through something tasteless, listening to the hum of the fridge and the quiet echo of voices from the unit below. Her front door opened. She jumped to her feet, heart racing, only to freeze when she saw him. Adrian stood in the doorway with a suitcase, wind-ruffled hair, and a tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Surprise," he said, dropping the suitcase by the wall. "I managed to get a few days." Lena's breath caught. "I didn't know you were coming." "That's how surprises work," he said lightly, stepping forward to press a brief kiss to her cheek. It felt more like a habit than an impulse. He glanced around. "Place looks the same," he said. "Yeah," she replied, forcing a smile. "Nothing's really changed." The extra coffee mug drying by the sink suddenly felt like a beacon. The note from Marcus, still tucked into a cookbook on the counter, burned at the edges of her vision. Through dinner, Adrian talked about meetings, hotel rooms, delayed flights. He seemed older somehow, or maybe just more distant, like she was hearing about the life of someone she'd once known well. Lena nodded and asked the right questions, but her mind kept drifting to the floor below, where she knew Marcus could probably hear the muffled murmur of their voices. Later that night, as she came out of the bathroom, she found Adrian sitting at the dining table with her phone in his hand. The screen glowed brightly in the dim room. He wasn't scrolling angrily. His expression was calm. Too calm. "Who's Marcus?" he asked without looking up. Lena's stomach plunged. "What? Your landlord, apparently," he said, eyes flicking to her. "There are a lot of messages here. Late nights, early mornings. Must be quite the maintenance plan." She felt cold all over. "He's been helping me since I lost my job. Sharing listings, checking in, that's all." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Helping you, how exactly?" he asked, each word clipped. "Just talking," she whispered. "He's been kind." He laughed once. No real humor in the sound. "Kind," he repeated. "Funny. Before I started traveling more, you used to talk to me like this." Now I get bullet points and missed calls, and someone else gets the messages about your bad days. Tears burned behind her eyes. It wasn't planned, she said. I didn't mean for it to happen. What? He asked quietly. You didn't mean to replace me. Her throat closed. I didn't cheat on you, she managed. I never slept with him. Never. I didn't say you did. He cut in sharply. But you found someone else to see you. To listen, to be there. And you didn't tell me you needed that from me. You just gave it to him. The truth of it hit her like a wave. She had no defense. I felt invisible. Ade, she said finally, voice breaking. I didn't know how to say that without sounding ungrateful. And he was just there. He watched her for a long moment, eyes glistening. Do you know what hurts? He said quietly. If you'd told me you were drowning, I would have come home sooner. But instead, you just found someone else to pull you up. He set the phone down, the soft click louder than it should have been. That's not nothing. Lena, he said. Marcus stood there, worry etched deep into his features. I heard shouting. He said, are you okay? She laughed once, a hollow sound. He found out, she said, about the messages, about you checking on me. He thinks I replaced him. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders tight. I'm sorry, he said. This is my fault. No, she argued, shaking her head. It's mine. I let this happen. I let myself lean on you when I should have been fighting for what was broken. They stood in silence for a moment, both of them aware of the fragile threads connecting them, all stretched to thin. Maybe you need space, Marcus said eventually, his voice low. From all of this, go see your family. Take some time away from the building. Think about what you actually want without my voice in the mix. She nodded slowly. Maybe, she whispered. I don't even know what okay looks like anymore. That night, she didn't hear Adrian come back. She didn't text him, and he didn't call. The bed felt too big and too small at the same time. Her phone buzzed around midnight. It was a message from Marcus. Please don't carry all of the blame on your shoulders. I never wanted to make your life harder. I just wanted you to feel safe for a while. She stared at the screen, fingers hovering. I don't know who I am anymore, she typed, then deleted. She tried again. I don't know where I belong right now. His reply came almost immediately. You belong to yourself first. Everything else comes after. If you need company, I'm awake. We don't even have to talk. Just sit. She looked at the brass key on the nightstand, the metal catching the streetlight in a way that felt like an invitation. Every reasonable part of her knew she should put the phone down, lock the door, sleep, wait. Loneliness, however, rarely cares about reason. She pulled on a sweater, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and stepped out into the dim hallway. The carpet muffled her steps as she descended the stairs, each one heavier than the last. She didn't even get a chance to knock. Marcus opened the door just as she reached for it, as if he'd been standing on the other side, waiting for the shadow under the crack. He looked at her with worry and something deeper that neither of them dared to name fully. They didn't say hello.